So thanks. It's good to be here today. So like Franz said, I've worked for about 8 years in digital marketing and strategy, and there's so much happening in the space. When I first joined Weber, every 2 years we would reevaluate our offerings and what we were doing. And then it seemed like, okay, we're rethinking things every month, and now it's like every 6 months we're rethinking what we're offering. And everything that's on this screen right now, we could spend the entire 50 minutes talking about any of them. But today I'm going to pick 5 of these that I think might be relevant to Yale sort of holistically. And I'm going to talk about them at a pretty high level because of the amount of time that we have. So I'm going to move pretty fast, and I will get you out there for your drinks in time. This is actually my second time presenting here. So last time I came, I spoke about content marketing and how do you operationalize a content marketing team. And the biggest piece of feedback I got was that I was speaking too much from a corporate lens and not enough for how things could be applied at Yale. So at the end of every section, I have a couple thought starters on what these trends might mean for Yale. And hopefully a few of those land and resonate with you. If not, happy to answer questions at the end. So the first thing that I want to start with today is a story about stories. And this very much, the title of this presentation is Digital Trends, New, Now, and Next. This is very much a now category, not something that's coming next. This is really something that we are considering a new best practice that everyone has got to grapple with and have a really strong handle on. And when I say stories, I don't mean narrative and storytelling. I mean stories as a technical format for conveying content. So one of the ways that I know that I'm getting really old in this space is that I now work with people who have no recollection of whole eras of the internet that were like vital to my career. And I think this is something that is about to fall into that category when I deal with some of the interns and new people that we hire. If you think back 10 years ago, when smartphones were just achieving some kind of a critical mass of penetration in the market, everyone was thinking about how you do video on smartphones, and everyone was doing what they always do with a new technology. They were taking the old format, the old conventions from film and TV and broadcast, and just slapping them into the new format. And as a result, we have a lot of people really awkwardly flipping their phones to view things sideways, unfortunate incidents when the sides of content is getting cut out, and it's very much a not native format of video for the platform. Fast forward to today, times have changed, whereas 10 years ago, people would not have even thought about filming content vertically. And in fact, I've had many conversations with film production people where they don't want to shoot content vertically because it is so against the aesthetic that they were trained with. Now people are very much embracing that as a format overall. People are spending huge chunks of time on mobile, more so than desktop, more and more every year. And stories are becoming the true native application of video on mobile. And just looking around, I'm guessing that everyone has a pretty good idea of what I mean when I say stories, but just in case, stories are a video format that combines video components, emoji overlays, typography, additional graphics into a series of static and moving images that tell a story. And just a quick little example of what they're like. This is one that Honda did. This is actually very simple as far as stories go. It's just one video. There's a few different overlays. The emojis are playing a key role. Some of them can actually get quite complex. And the story about stories is that this is something that started with Snapchat. This was one of the key features that Snapchat used as a differentiator against other social networks, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, that it was competing with. Facebook stole the format. They integrated it into the core Facebook app. Most significantly, they made it a key piece of Instagram's functionality. That's one of the things that caused Instagram to explode in popularity over the last few years. And at the same time, they kneecapped Snapchat's growth and were able to keep them as a second-tier competitor rather than someone who could truly steal a lot of market share from Facebook. But Facebook isn't the only one that has taken it. Twitter has a version of this. WhatsApp has a version of this. And when you think about across messaging platforms and social platforms, The use of stories is exploding. Last year in their Q4 reporting, Instagram reported that on a daily basis, 500 million of their 1 billion users were using stories on a daily basis. So they're either creating stories themselves or they're interacting with stories that their friends have created. So when you think about the types of content that you need to be sending out into the world to reach your audiences, stories is very quickly becoming one of the dominant forms across all social platforms. And so very quickly, what could this potentially mean for Yale? If you are in charge with running communications programs that reach out to students or prospective students, that 100% means mobile and video. And at this point, I assume most people know that those two things are vital to any communications campaign aimed at a younger audience. But it also means stories. If you're just doing link share posts or graphics or a traditional video, you're missing out on a huge opportunity to talk to these audiences in a native way. And you really need to start thinking about how you're going to experiment with stories over the next year. I think when people first see stories and process what they are, they go towards this place of thinking of stories as just a new evolution of fast, snackable content for a generation that has a shorter and shorter attention span. And I don't think that's actually correct. Certainly there are some applications that fall into that realm, but if you look at what news organizations are doing on Instagram, on Facebook, on Snapchat, institutions like Vox are doing really interesting things, taking the ability of stories to string multiple different content pieces together. So think opening with a title card, moving to a video, moving into a graphic of some kind, moving into a typographic statement, back to a video. And they're actually finding really engaging long-form uses for stories where you can talk about really complex topics through a content format that maybe you weren't quite thinking would be able to, to bear that much information. So when you think about how you might use stories this year, don't just think about students and brand affinity and raising awareness and short, really quick, snappy things. Think about how it might also apply to longer form, more complex topics that you want to convey, but you want to get out to audiences on all of the different channels, not just in a written text or the types of formats that you usually think of for long form. Live streaming is the new social. So when I got into digital marketing and advertising and strategy, it was the golden era of blogs. So I'm very much of the techno-utopian democratization of everything. Not that I believe any of that anymore after the last 2 years. But I think what we saw happen was as blogging and those technologies faded, social came onto the scene. You have Mark Zuckerberg talking about the way that Facebook and social facilitates community building and gathering. And I think we've all seen that that is not actually true in a lot of instances lately. But one of the things that I'm really interested in is the way that there are some new applications of live streaming that may actually be able to bring back just a little bit of that that hope that there could be a true community platform enabled by technology. So before we get into what that actually is, some background. Over the last year, streaming and over-the-top delivery systems for media have started to surpass pay TV and broadcast in terms of total number of subscribers. If you look at the growth of cord cutters and cord nevers, these are people who have either gotten rid of their traditional TV and cable packages or have never actually had cable and TV packages because they're getting it all over the internet. These are continuing to grow, and these types of streaming applications are becoming the dominant way that people get what we have traditionally thought of as programmed, televised media. So these platforms are starting to gain a majority share of the market over the traditional vehicles. At the same time, they're also starting to dominate creatively. So last year was the first year where the streaming services, Amazon, Hulu, Netflix, actually commissioned and produced more TV shows than all of the broadcast networks combined. So we're now at a place where the dynamic has completely flipped, and streaming is now the dominant and natural way that people are taking in that type of media. Social platforms are seeing this. It's been no secret that for a really long time, Facebook's goal from an advertising perspective has been to steal away the dollars that would traditionally go to television and realize that as its own revenue. We've seen over the last year a number of platforms, Facebook, Instagram, all trying to launch their own version of streaming television. And if you take a look at total number of users, which is what this chart shows right now, it seems like they're winning. There's more people who are streaming and watching that type of program, plus pure, raw, user-created live streaming than on digital streaming subscription services, TV networks or site apps, or even gaming applications. But this is all a lie, actually. This data is fuzzy. Facebook would love for you to believe it's true, but it's only part of the story. Even though they have more people by volume than some channels, I think the future of live streaming isn't necessarily going to be the social platform. It's going to be Twitch. It's going to be places like Netflix, YouTube, Hulu that are actually getting a lot more time and engagement with these audiences than the Facebooks and the Instagrams of the world. And Twitch in particular, I think, is poised to dominate in this space, not necessarily on the programmed media side, but on the raw, live stream, user-created side. So for those of you who don't know what Twitch is a live streaming platform that's available on all devices. It's made its reputation on the back of esports. People who play video games professionally go on, play each other, stream themselves playing these games, and while they're playing, there's a running live chat with all the people who follow them, and they're engaging with conversation with those people. They're reading the comments, those people are interacting with each other, with the streamer. There's some really interesting subscription and incentive infrastructure built in to allow people to support creators and pay them and tip them. There's interesting incentives that the creators and streamers can send back down into the community to support their loyal followers. And what we've seen over the past few years is not only are people spending huge amounts of time on this platform, there are genuine communities forming around these games, around these streamers that for the moment, don't have some of the same problems that we're seeing in terms of community formation and public discussion and bullying issues, trolls, people coming in to poison the dialogue. For the moment, that hasn't really happened at Twitch. But at the same time, I think even though that's how Twitch has become the platform that it is, that's not what Twitch sees as the future of the platform. It's always going to be an important piece, but Twitch itself wants to become the platform for all live streaming for a whole variety of communities, from musicians to people who right now are doing beauty blogging on Instagram or YouTube, DIY, politics, travel. Twitch wants to be the place where anyone who has a use for live streaming and wants to build a community can come and make that platform their home. And so far, we're actually seeing some success there. There's been really interesting experiments by the Washington Post and news organizations to jump on the platform and create their own streams. Amateur musicians are coming on the platform and building their own communities and finding ways to support creation of their songs. Nike and other brands are coming onto the platform to both support the e-gamers and piggyback off of the streams that they're doing, but also find new and interesting ways to run their own streams on the platform. And as we get into the 2020 election cycle, I think there's going to be no shortage of live events that are ripe for streaming. I think it's going to be really interesting to see if Twitch can have a breakout moment in the politics and news space and not just the esports community. And when that happens, I think it'll be interesting to see, can they actually deal with all of the problems that we've seen on social media that are inevitably going to get ported over to that platform as well. So what does this mean for Yale? Start thinking about a live content streaming strategy. I'm sure you guys have live streaming strategies. You guys do tons of events like this. I'm sure there's no shortage of streams happening on own channels for Yale, but what is your live streaming channel strategy off Yale channels? What would you do if you had to go and leverage something like Twitch in order to meet an audience where they are and not expect them to come to you? I think over the next year, everyone should be watching Twitch to see what happens. There's going to be so many experiments on the platform by brands, by politicians. It's going to be really interesting to see where they can break through and what takes off versus, is it gonna just be a blip and be purely relegated to this esports space? And lastly, as you think about your strategy, don't just think, oh, I'm going to go and create my own live stream on Twitch. There are lots of interesting creators on the platform, and there's lots of ways to piggyback off of those creators. I think one of the more interesting things that I've seen is climate scientists have actually been piggybacking onto the live stream of gamers. They'll get into the they'll talk to someone who has a following. They'll play a game like Fortnite with them, and they will talk about climate change science with the gamer while they're playing Fortnite, so that they're able to reach that broader community of people who are used to playing with, are used to following that streamer. Number 3, rise of the machine interfaces. So I think the big headline point here is we're living through probably one of the biggest changes in user interfaces in 30 years. If you think back, we had the introduction of the graphical user interface. Things were pretty static for a long time. We got mobile. Mobile, for the longest time, didn't even have its own native formats. We're just getting to that now. It was just a reapplication of what we had from desktops into a smaller screen. But now we're actually starting to see much more native applications of how we deal with a mobile-first world. And I want to talk through a few of those things, a few of those interfaces and what they mean. But first, I think it's important to note that messaging and one-to-one or one-to-few communications has started to overtake social media. So what you're seeing here, the big 4 messaging platforms back in, I think it was 2015, crossed over and have more daily users than the social platforms. And that is growing and is probably going to keep growing. This is something that we see, this is driven in many ways by Asia, but we in the West are starting to catch up more and more. And I think nowhere do you see this more than in the way Facebook is pivoting right now. If you think about all the things that they've announced lately, one of the most significant is that they're going to integrate WhatsApp, Messenger, and Instagram on the back end to essentially create one interoperable messaging system. And in part, they're doing that because those messaging platforms are private and encrypted, and if more people are moving over towards messaging platforms, Facebook wants to be there, and if that can be in a private and encrypted format, Facebook doesn't have to deal with all of the content challenges that it has right now, because it can't see the content that's going over those networks. So if people are bullying, if there's misinformation campaigns, Facebook is technically unable to even intervene in the way that a lot of the policy discussions are happening right now. So that's one reason. It's going to solve the moderation challenges they have. But the other piece is that they see the way that user habits are changing. They look at WeChat in Asia and see how it has become the one platform where everything happens. If you're a user of WeChat in Asia, you can use it to order food, you can get your car, you can order movie or plane tickets, you can shop, you can chat with your friends. Everything is plugged into the messaging system, and everything, including commerce, can happen through that platform. Facebook wants to be the one that's in the position to be the WeChat of the West, and I think that's also another reason you see them starting to dip their toe into the crypto space. It would be great if they could have their own currency within the platform to help negotiate all of those transactions. But this is actually a big problem for brands, corporations, institutions like Yale. We do not have as advanced a messaging platform as they do in Asia here. And if you're trying to reach people on these messaging platforms, it's really hard. It is not like a plug-and-play ad system or just being able to get up organically and hope people find you on the platform. Those opportunities are not nearly as robust in messaging here as they are in Asia. So that is a conundrum that a lot of brands are going to have to start dealing with. Pivoting, I promise this is not a non sequitur. At the same time, we're seeing AI begin to transform whole industries and sectors of the economy. At Weber Shandwick, we really looked at this as an analytics opportunity first, and the chart that you see here from McKinsey is actually sizing the analytics opportunity of AI, and I know it's hard to read, I'll spare you. The upshot is hundreds of billions of dollars in potential value to be unlocked through AI just in the analytics space across industries. But when you think about marketing and communications, inclusive of, but beyond analytics, McKinsey thinks there's a $1 to $2 trillion opportunity to be unlocked there as well. And that's everything from ways that AI can assist with better content personalization, upgrading service functions. There are lots of ways that AI can aid in communications plans. So why am I talking about that, and what is the connection to messaging? It's chatbots. What we're seeing right now is that AI-driven chatbots are really the initial touch point where these two trends are coming together in a way that's really impactful for our clients. So more and more consumers want to interact with brands through messaging systems. They don't want to deal with phone trees and terrible personal customer service. They don't want to go and navigate websites where the logic isn't constructed according to the way that they want to interact with the brand or how their questions need to be answered. They want a very simple system where they can ask questions, questions can be answered, and they can get to the thing that they need to get to as fast as possible. And chatbots, particularly chatbots that are leveraging natural language processing and AI to understand intent and sentiment and connect that back up to a potential bank of responses, those are the places where we're seeing really successful engagements and a really successful application in bringing AI and messaging together in a way that solves that messaging challenge in terms of how you reach people through that type of a platform. And even the best chatbot is still going to be, for now at least, screen and text-based, but that is also not the way that things are trending overall when we think about user interfaces. So we're seeing more and more people are interacting through voice. So right now, more than half of the US population actively uses voice assistants, either through their phone or through a smart speaker in the home. Excuse me. And this is starting to radically alter both the search market and the way people expect to interact with technology and with brands. So Comscore estimates that by next year, 50% of all searches are going to be done by voice, and Gartner says by the end of next year, 30% of all those searches are going to be on a device that does not have a screen at all. So that creates another set of challenges. How do you, if you think about what a search strategy is, how do you make sure that when people are asking questions to a voice assistant, your results are getting surfaced? How do you create applications that can reach and engage people on those platforms? We're starting to see some interesting things happen in that space. So two in particular that seem to be successful so far is customer service. We've seen some companies, particularly energy utilities, put together customer service applications that can be activated by voice on home speakers and walk you through any problem that you're having. And they've also been using it for bill pay. So, very common customer interactions. They're going out, finding new ways to get people through what can often be frustrating processes faster using new technology. And so what does that mean at Yale? So I think it's a few very disparate things, actually. So I'm sure a lot of you are in charge of social strategy for different functions within Yale. So how is your social strategy going to evolve as audiences stop using social and move over to messaging? What are you going to do when it's harder to reach them because the platforms are less open, less conducive to mass communication? When we think about leveraging AI, chatbots, what are you doing on a regular basis that can be routinized and automated? What are the frequently asked questions that your department gets all of the time that are either buried in web pages or take an inordinate amount of time, of a real person's time to run down when they're getting them all the time? These are places where some kind of automated solution like a messaging, a chatbot or a messaging application can actually solve those problems, give you a better experience to users, and free up your staff time to do more strategic things, or take the people who really need the one-on-one help and go a lot deeper and have a much higher level of that personal customer service over fewer interactions rather than spreading themselves thin over a large number of interactions. And lastly, how is your SEO strategy going to evolve as voice captures more and more of the search market? It's not going to be about optimizing around keywords. It's to the extent that your pages are constructed correctly, that always helps. But people are asking questions. Right now they're asking questions about the weather and news and sports, but soon they're going to be asking questions about everything. And are you ready to get served in the top result for a particular question that is going to be relevant to you as an institution and the people that you want to talk with? So fake everything. This one's probably pretty self-explanatory. I think we've all seen the issues over the past years. So we have Russian bots manipulating political conversations. We have bots and fraud on the ad side. We have the potential for deep fakes to disrupt political conversation, or we are one deep fake away from a company's bottom line getting tanked. And even the dust up we saw around Nancy Pelosi just a few weeks ago with the altered video, what people would call a cheap fake. It's not even a real deep fake. It's just been slightly altered, can cause a huge amount of problem. And we're even seeing some interesting things happen. It's not all negative. We're seeing some interesting positive fake things happening too, like the growth of fake, what people are calling fake influencers, but are actually almost like digital AI mascots for brands. And these are just a few influencers that are not real, but are just as influential as many celebrities are today. So there's a lot going on in this space. It probably feels like we've reached peak fake, but I think it's actually going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And that's a challenge for our clients and for institutions. In this environment, current listening solutions are pretty inadequate. For the most part, when you ask people, how are you monitoring what people are saying? How are you able to know whether something is real or fake? People will tell you, oh, we're using Brandwatch, or we're using Sysomos or Crimson Hexagon, and that's great, but are they going deep enough to really understand what is happening and where conversations are coming from? Because conversations are not just happening on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Google. There is a whole other layers to the internet, and conversations are starting way down deep, hidden away from most people, and they are percolating up before you see them go viral on the main networks. And the challenge is, by the time it gets to the main network, if you are a company that is if you are a company that is being attacked in some way, if you're a politician or a government that's being attacked, by the time it gets to the main networks, it's too late. All you can do is react. You have no chance of limiting the conversation, redefining the framework of the conversation. Your ability to proactively dampen the effect is already gone. So the thing that we're seeing companies do in response to this is really level up their listening capabilities. And the way that they're doing it is what we're calling media forensics. So it's a set of processes and tools. It's a combination of AI and machines with human experts who can do real research and understand what the machines are uncovering and go into places that the machines can't actually go. Because if you think back to all of the different platforms on the iceberg in that slide, a lot of them have APIs that can be scraped by listening services. A lot of them don't. A lot of them you have to have a real person inside who understands the cultures of the platform investigating what's happening. And we're seeing companies bring these two things together to start to understand not just where things come from and how they've spread, but also as a warning system that something may be coming and they're going to need to have a response to it in some way. Just a quick example of how this has worked in the past. So everyone probably recognizes Emma Gonzalez, the Parkland activist. So she was on a Teen Vogue cover shoot with a few of her fellow activists, and she was shown ripping up this picture of a gun target. And way down in some forums that gun right advocates congregate in, they photoshopped the target into a picture of the Constitution. They started to spread that privately through their own networks. It started to percolate up into Reddit and some other places that that then took it up and spread it into Twitter, Facebook, and eventually it blew up and got on the news. So it's just an example of how misinformation can percolate through all of those levels. And media forensics is a way to, if necessary, backtrack through those steps and understand what happened, or hopefully proactively see it before it breaks out and enable you to respond. So it is very much a crisis mitigation and prevention tool, but I think it also goes beyond that. So more and more consumers are pushing companies to take stands on social issues. People want to be engaged with companies that are active socially and politically, and this is putting companies in a bit of a bind. There's lots of hashtags and memes and things that are flying around on social all of the time. How do you know whether something is right for you to jump onto or not? Do you understand the full provenance of an idea that is going viral on the web? And one of the best examples that I've ever seen of this is this reporting by the New York Times. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend you go and find it and take a look at it later today. It takes like 10 minutes to get through. It's not, it's less intimidating than it looks at times. But what they did was took a look at this phrase, jobs, not mobs, and they traced the evolution of it from right-wing forums over onto Reddit, where it was picked up by Scott Adams, the cartoonist who created Dilbert, promoted onto his social channels, picked up by Fox News, and then eventually tweeted out by the President of the United States. So again, it's about understanding the full context of where something comes from and how the conversations that we're having as a society are developing, so that you can evaluate whether or not it makes sense for you to be in that conversation or not, or at least have a game plan for responding to that conversation if it's something that's directed at you as an organization. And so what it means at Yale, I think this is very much in line with what we typically tell our clients. So what is your monitoring solution right now? How deep does it go? What can it tell you? What can it tell you? I think it's worth taking a moment to understand what it's capable of and what your need is for going deeper or having a different solution than what you have. Explore scenarios in which fake content might damage your reputation. Like for people who work in public affairs or issues management positions, I'm sure you have an understanding of places where Yale might be perceived as vulnerable or at risk. What do those scenarios look like? And then how do you game plan those out? Can you conduct crisis training to make sure that your response frameworks are actually something that can workable and are not going to fail you when the moment to deploy them actually comes? And how do you create muscle memory among staff who maybe are not familiar with crisis management, and you want them to know how they're going to react in the moment when something like this happens? Doing fantastic on time. This is great. So last one, and this is a new idea, so you guys are my guinea pigs here. I have not presented this anywhere before. What I'm calling personal ecosystems as the new executive equity. And if executive equity is too agency jargony of a term for you, it basically just means how do we promote and raise the profile of executives within an organization through PR, marketing, advertising. So I've mentioned this before, but there really is a strong trend towards consumers wanting CEOs to be engaged on social right now, and CEOs starting to hop on social. We're seeing that consumers are more likely to trust companies when they see that their CEO is active on social and responding to issues about the company or things that are happening in the news. We see that employee engagement and satisfaction is higher in companies where CEOs are engaging in those ways. And again, the consumers are more likely to want to associate and make purchases with companies that they feel are taking a stand and where they see that active engagement, particularly from the C-suite. And all of this really points to, over the next year, an influx of even more CEOs and C-suite executives on social media than are on there right now, particularly on the platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And everyone will tell you you need to have a strategy for that, and you do. And my response is, yeah, but social is not really the greatest place anymore. It's a bit of a dumpster fire. And is that where you want your CEO to engage? Like, do you want your CEO exposed to all of the craziness and the people that are going to come out of the woodwork and attack? It's not really a conducive forum to complex discussions as we've found right now. And the other thing is, I think a lot of executives who will naturally take to the platform are probably early adopters, and they're probably already there. So I do have my own doubts about whether or not executives that are coming on late to the game are going to be comfortable in the medium and really put themselves out there and say things that are interesting enough to get the kind of traction that they're hoping to get through a social program. Example number one, of course, is Elon Musk. So, a totally native user of social has used it to essentially be a one-man PR shop that has vastly increased the reputation of all of his companies. But of late, we've literally seen him destroy shareholder value with a tweet. So a bit of a cautionary tale as well. And again, something that I think executives and anyone who's charged with pulling together an executive equity program really needs to think about carefully. At the same time, I am completely fascinated by the emergence of slow media. So I think there's a really interesting creative tension happening right now in the media landscape. So much is pushing towards faster, more snackable, more visual types of content. All of the advertising and monetary incentives of the media system are aligned with pushing for that faster type of content. And I think because of all the challenges we're having with social right now and relative lower trust in the media, people want to pull back from that. They don't necessarily want to engage in all of those things as much as they did in the past. And I think we're starting to see the development of media systems that are tailored more towards slower consumption, deeper engagement on individual topics. And I think this is why we're seeing newsletters have a resurgence in popularity over the last few years. They're both able to cut through the clutter of all of the different things that are coming in on your social feeds and give you a curated view of what is most important. And a lot of the most successful newsletters don't try and boil the ocean and cover everything. They go really deep on one topic, like Casey Newton's newsletter for The Verge that specifically covers Facebook and tech and privacy issues. There's an amazing blog/newsletter that is about business and tech called Stratechery. These are all made for people who want to spend a lot more time and thought on a particular topic. And I think nowhere are we seeing this more than in the rise of podcasting as a format. So podcasting seems like it's going to keep growing, really fast year over year. The ad dollars are starting to come there as well right now, which bodes well for the health of podcasting as an overall media ecosystem. And as you can see from the chart here, the amount of time people are spending with podcasts, which is a very intimate format that allows you to go really deep, really thoughtfully, slowly on an individual subject. That's also, climbing really fast. 2 hours per day people are spending listening to podcasts. We're starting to get into like TV territory in terms of how much of your time it's taking up. And that's a really great place for people who want to get messages out there. And the way that all of this comes together is the personal media ecosystem for thought leadership. So I think, what do I mean by this? I think the best example is just journalists themselves. Journalists can no longer afford to be employed by one news outlet where they're writing one column or just covering one beat. They need to get themselves out there in many different formats because A, it increases their value to the news organizations and helps them pull in more money, but it's also job security and helps them find new jobs if the news outlet that they're at goes under or cut staff. They are able to build up personal brands across multiple channels that they're able to port with them wherever they go. And I think Dan Simmons is a fantastic example of this. He's pretty much the master at it. So Dan Simmons, for those who don't know, has made his name in sports. He has founded a wide variety of media platforms. He has his own online magazine called The Ringer. Before that, he had one called Grantland. He has his own podcast. He has he did live stream his analysis of Game of Thrones after every episode. He has a Facebook Live that he puts on during sporting events. 6 million followers on Twitter, 177,000 followers on Instagram. He's got columns on multiple publications, Esquire, Recode. He had an HBO TV show for a while. He has extended his reach through multiple channels and really built up a personal brand and connection with a wide variety of audiences that goes really deep on each of those channels. And I think this is potentially a really interesting model for thinking about executive equity and thought leadership overall. So this is Carla B., PhD. I made her up. She's not real. I tried to get an AI-generated fake person, but the aspect ratios didn't work out. So she's a stock photo. But you can imagine that she is an employee at a biotech startup in Boston. She knows a lot about biology. She knows about startups because she's in a biotech. She also cares deeply about policy because how policy is implemented directly affects her ability to do her job. If you are charged with communications at the company that Carla works at, you could think about all of the different ways you could raise her profile and get her out there. You could be getting her on podcasts as an expert to be interviewed on, science podcasts, women in tech podcasts. You could be cultivating her as an expert source with the Wall Street Journal on the business side. She could have her own Twitter following. She could be a contributor to a publication on neuroscience that exists on Medium called The Spike. She could be writing a series of articles on Boston biotech on LinkedIn and cultivating an audience there. She could be someone who appears on Facebook Live during company events. And from a paid perspective, as you're thinking about sponsored content on podcasts or on newsletters, she could be a voice in those channels. And so I think what's interesting here is this is something that can be applied not just to a CEO or not just to the C-suite. Expertise in companies is not just locked up in those few individuals. It exists throughout the organization. She doesn't have to be the primary spokesperson that is there on every channel all the time. And in fact, it's better if she's not. We have one client that I have worked on for a while now where one of the challenges they had is they have a bunch of different departments, all of who have experts, all of who get pitched to media, and because they all want the same media, they're constantly stepping over each other's pitches, and it's actually working at cross purposes with their communication strategy, and they're essentially competing with themselves for the same space in news articles. If all the experts had their own tailored plan for where they were being pitched, how that was happening from an own standpoint, from an earned standpoint, from a paid standpoint, I think the reach of any one particular individual would be smaller, but you'd be able to build up personal brands for all of these people that run a lot deeper, and you'd be able to have a much more effective media presence overall. So what does it mean for Yale? I think, first and foremost, the basics. Are school leaders and spokespeople adequately represented on social? I stand by what I said about social not necessarily always being the best place, but it is sort of a baseline that people expect. So then are you taking advantage of slow media formats, and not to convey content that is snackable, but thinking about the long form, really complex things you have to convey and the way that those can be vehicles for those types of communications in a way that standard social channels cannot. And then if you are responsible for promoting a wide number of people, maybe it's all of the different faculty in a department and their scholarship, what is the ecosystem strategy that you could build around each of those individuals that want to work with you from a communication standpoint to ensure that they're all getting exposure, they're all getting the right level of effort applied to their communications, and they're not stepping on each other trying to secure the same spot or talk to the same audiences. And that's it. I think we've got some time for questions. Thanks.